Above the Sicilian sky on that summer afternoon of July 2nd, 1943, a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrated under a hail of bullets. The German pilot at the controls had no warning. The P-40 Warhawk came screaming from the sun, its guns already blazing before he could react. His fighter tumbled earthward toward Castelvetrano airfield, trailing smoke and shattered dreams of Aryan invincibility. The American who'd just pulled the trigger was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, 22 years old, born and raised in Brazil, Indiana. And he'd just accomplished something the Luftwaffe's leadership had declared impossible. A black aviator had destroyed one of the Third Reich's premier warplanes in single combat. That swastika Hall painted on his Warhawk's fuselage would be just the beginning. It was the first mark in what would become a devastating tally. 112 enemy aircraft obliterated by the men German pilots would allegedly dub the Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. In Hitler's Germany, the entire architecture of Nazi pseudoscience rested on a foundation of racial hierarchy. Black people were classified as Untermenschen, literally subhumans. According to the twisted logic of the Nuremberg laws, they were genetically incapable of operating sophisticated technology or displaying battlefield valor. German law had even criminalized marriage between Aryans and anyone of African heritage. Yet thousands of feet above the Mediterranean, that entire belief system was about to be shattered by 992 meticulously trained aviators from Tuskegee, Alabama. They would dismantle not only German aircraft, but the very ideology that claimed white supremacy was a law of nature. The Luftwaffe had no idea what was coming. As they scrambled to intercept American bombing raids throughout 1943, German fighter pilots were about to encounter some of the most intensively prepared, fiercely determined combat aviators the United States Army Air Forces had ever produced. These weren't just skilled pilots. They were men who'd conquered barriers their white fellow servicemen never encountered. Their training had been longer and more punishing than standard programs, and when they climbed into their cockpits, they carried more than just military duty on their shoulders. They bore the weight of an entire people's dignity, the burden of proving to a doubting world that excellence knows no color. The mathematics of air warfare would soon be written across European skies in undeniable numbers. 15,000-plus combat sorties, 1,578 missions flown, 112 confirmed aerial kills, and a bomber protection record that outperformed white fighter squadrons by a significant margin. These weren't just impressive statistics. They were facts that would force even the most fanatical Nazi ideologues to confront the complete bankruptcy of their racial pseudoscience. But that first aerial victory didn't begin in the clouds over Sicily. It began in the suffocating atmosphere of America's own system of racial oppression. 2 decades before Charles Hall's guns found their target, America's military establishment had already decided that black soldiers were fundamentally inferior. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College issued an official assessment titled Employment of Negro Manpower in War. Its conclusions were brutal and unambiguous. Compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. This wasn't fringe opinion. This was official doctrine. The report insisted that black troops lacked both the intellectual capacity for technical military roles and the moral courage for combat command. It was gospel among military planners, an institutional certainty that would shape personnel policy for decades. But even as these prejudices calcified into policy, individual black Americans were already proving them catastrophically wrong. Eugene Bullard had taken to the skies for France during the First World War, not because he loved France more than America, but because America flatly refused to let him serve as a pilot. Bessie Coleman, unable to find a single American flight school that would accept her, traveled to France in 1921 and returned with her pilot's license, becoming the first black woman aviator in the world. By the 1930s, Chicago's Coffey School of Aeronautics had successfully trained dozens of black civilian pilots, demonstrating with each graduate that mastery of aviation had absolutely nothing to do with melanin. As Hitler's shadow lengthened across Europe and war became inevitable, pressure mounted from multiple directions. Civil rights titans like Walter White of the NAACP, labor organizer A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie launched a relentless campaign demanding black participation in military aviation. Meanwhile, black-owned newspapers, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American, hammered the Roosevelt administration with an uncomfortable question that wouldn't go away. How could the United States credibly fight for freedom overseas while systematically denying it to millions of its own citizens? On April 3, 1939, a crack appeared in the wall. Public Law 18 became reality after Senator Harry H. Schwartz inserted a seemingly minor amendment. The civilian pilot training program would be required to include one or more schools designated by the Civil Aeronautics Authority for the training of any Negro air pilot. It was progress wrapped in segregation, a grudging half measure, but it was an opening. When Franklin Roosevelt pursued his historic third term in 1940, black voters in critical northern industrial cities suddenly became politically indispensable. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson made the announcement the Army would form the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. But the announcement came with a telling qualifier that exposed the military's true expectations. This would be classified as an experiment, a test to determine whether black men could even be trained as combat pilots. The underlying assumption was clear: probably not. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. understood exactly what rested on his shoulders when he led 26 pilots of the 99th Fighter Squadron onto North African soil in April 1943. Davis wasn't just any officer. He was the son of Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., who had become America's first black general, and he'd survived 4 years of psychological warfare at West Point, where the silent treatment was institutional policy. No white cadet spoke to him except when military protocol absolutely required it. Now, he commanded men who represented something far larger than themselves. They carried the hopes and dreams of 13 million black Americans who'd been told for generations that they weren't good enough. The 99th landed at Farjuna, Tunisia, and was immediately attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under Colonel William W. Momyer, a commander who made absolutely no effort to hide his contempt for the idea of black pilots. Momyer assigned them to routine patrols over empty Mediterranean waters, deliberately keeping them far from genuine combat operations. He wanted failure, and when they didn't immediately rack up impressive kill counts, he believed he had the evidence he needed. Their baptism by fire came on the morning of June 2, 1943, a strike against Italian forces occupying the island of Pantelleria. As their battle-worn P-40 Warhawks struggled toward altitude, German fighters materialized from the clouds. The Tuskegee pilots held their formation with disciplined precision, shielding their bombers from attack. Neither side lost aircraft, but the Luftwaffe learned something crucial that day. These new pilots wouldn't panic under fire. But everything changed exactly 1 month later. July 2, 1943. Charles Hall was flying his 8th combat sortie, providing cover for B-25 Mitchell bombers hammering Castelvetrano airfield in Sicily. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s came slashing toward the bomber formation from behind. Hall's own account tells the story. I saw 2 Focke-Wulfs following the bombers just after the bombs were dropped. I headed for the space between the fighters and bombers and managed to turn inside the Jerries. I fired a long burst and saw my tracers penetrate the second aircraft. He was turning to the left but suddenly fell off and headed straight into the ground. When Hall's wheels touched down, the entire base exploded in celebration. Black ground crew members who'd endured months of racist abuse from white personnel finally had their answer, a definitive rebuttal to every insult, every doubt, every sneer. Hall's kill was the first aerial victory ever recorded by a black American pilot in United States military history. But Colonel Momyer wasn't finished. By January 1944, the 99th had been engaged in combat operations for 7 months. Momyer filed an official report that could have ended everything. He claimed the black pilots lacked aggressiveness and formally recommended their removal from combat duty. The report climbed the chain of command until it reached General Henry Hap Arnold, who began preparing to terminate the entire program. Then Anzio happened.
January 27, 1944. The Luftwaffe launched a massive counteroffensive against Allied forces struggling to hold the Anzio beachhead. 15 pilots from the 99th, still flying their outdated P-40s, found themselves facing technologically superior Focke-Wulf 190s over the battlefield. What unfolded over the next 2 days would permanently silence the doubters. The 99th tore through the German formation, shooting down multiple enemy aircraft. Sources differ on the exact count, ranging between 8 and 13 confirmed kills over 48 hours. Captain Charles Hall personally claimed 2 additional victories, bringing his total to 3. In just 2 days, flying equipment that was already obsolete, they'd destroyed more enemy aircraft than in their previous 7 months of operations combined. The War Department couldn't ignore results that dramatic. They launched a comprehensive study comparing the 99th's performance metrics against other P-40 squadrons throughout the theater. The conclusion was unambiguous. The black pilots were performing identically to white units flying the same equipment. Anzio proved beyond any reasonable doubt that black aviators could excel in aerial combat if they were simply given the chance. May 1944 brought new orders that would transform outcasts into legends. The 332nd Fighter Group, an expanded force combining the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons, received assignment to the 15th Air Force as long-range bomber escorts. They would fly the most dangerous missions of the air war, deep penetration raids into the heart of Nazi Germany. Colonel Benjamin Davis assembled his pilots at Ramitelli Airfield on Italy's Adriatic coast and laid out their mission in terms that left no ambiguity. We cannot afford to lose bombers. Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home. That directive would become their combat doctrine, the philosophy that defined every mission they flew. Stay with the bombers no matter what, no matter how tempting the target, no matter how easy the kill. Never abandon your post. In June 1944, General Nathan Twining implemented a systematic identification system for fighter groups across the theater. Each unit would receive distinctive color markings for instant visual recognition in the chaos of combat. The 332nd was assigned red, not subtle accent stripes, entire tail assemblies painted brilliant crimson. When they transitioned to P-51 Mustangs, those iconic fighters bore red tails, red propeller spinners, and red nose bands that became unmistakable from miles away. The first bomber crews who received red tail escorts had no idea their protectors were black aviators. They only knew one thing: these fighters stayed close. They never peeled off chasing glory. They never abandoned their charges for easy victories elsewhere. Word spread rapidly through the bomber squadrons. Request the red tails if you can get them. July 18, 1944 would test the red tails like nothing before. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers targeting the Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany. The bombers were late. Davis faced a critical decision: return to base or orbit in enemy airspace waiting for them. He chose to wait. When the bombers finally arrived, so did the Luftwaffe, approximately 100 German fighters attacking from every direction simultaneously. The Germans had calculated that overwhelming force might finally shatter the red tail's protective screen. Despite ferocious defensive flying by the 332nd, who claimed 11 to 12 kills, 15 B-17 Flying Fortresses fell to enemy guns in 20 minutes of savage aerial combat. The 332nd lost 3 pilots, Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Critics seized on the bomber losses as proof that black pilots couldn't handle major engagements, but operational analysis told a different story. The 332nd had arrived at an already impossible tactical situation, with massive German forces already engaging the bombers. They hadn't failed. They'd prevented complete catastrophe. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe's conventional fighters were nearly finished, barely able to contest Allied air superiority. But Germany had one final card to play: the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. With a maximum speed of 540 miles per hour, it could outrun any propeller-driven aircraft in existence. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group received their most challenging assignment yet: escort bombers on a 1,600-mile round trip to Berlin to obliterate the Daimler-Benz tank factory. Intelligence warned that Me-262s from Jagdgeschwader 7 would defend the target. Colonel Davis led 43 P-51 Mustangs into the Reich's heart. As they approached Berlin, Me-262s appeared, the largest concentration of jet fighters ever assembled for a single interception. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had studied the jets' vulnerabilities obsessively. "We knew the German jets were faster than we were," he explained later. "Instead of going directly after them, we went away from them and then turned into their blind spots." Brown destroyed one Me-262, reporting, "I pulled up at him in a 15-degree climb and fired 3 long bursts from 2,000 feet at 8 o'clock to him. Almost immediately, the pilot bailed out from about 24,500 feet. Lieutenant Earl Lane accomplished what many experts considered impossible, shooting down an Me-262 with a 2,000-yard deflection shot using the new K-14 computing gun sight. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed the third jet kill that afternoon. 3 Me-262s destroyed in a single engagement. The Red Tails had just exceeded the total Me-262 kills achieved by all previous American fighter groups in one mission. The 332nd Fighter Group earned a Distinguished Unit Citation for that day's work. Not every encounter between Tuskegee Airmen and Germans ended in triumph. 32 pilots became prisoners of war, and their experiences revealed fascinating contradictions between Nazi ideology and military pragmatism. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson was shot down on August 12, 1944, during his 19th mission. His P-51 took flak over southern France while strafing radar installations. During interrogation, the German officer demonstrated disturbingly comprehensive intelligence about the 332nd Fighter Group. The interrogator had information about Ramitelli Airfield, about our squadron commanders, even details about my parents' home in Detroit. Jefferson recalled decades later. He knew my father was a teacher and my mother's maiden name. Their intelligence was frighteningly thorough. Inside Stalag Luft 3, Jefferson discovered something unexpected. He was treated like any other American officer. White POWs from bomber crews frequently approached him with gratitude for red tail protection. These interactions, impossible in segregated America, occurred naturally in a German prison camp. Jefferson recognized the bitter irony immediately. Here I was in a Nazi POW camp being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back home. When the war ended and Jefferson returned to the United States, he was immediately segregated at the disembarkation point. While German pilots allegedly acknowledged the Red Tail's skill with the nickname Schwarze Vogelmenschen, many white Americans remained completely unaware that black pilots even existed. American bomber crews became the Red Tail's most passionate advocates. These men who faced death on every mission over Europe cared about exactly one thing: survival. Race meant nothing. Only capability mattered. Bomber crews developed their own mythology around the Red Tails. Stories circulated about their distinctive flying style, the way they waggled their wings in greeting, their impossibly tight formations, their absolute refusal to abandon damaged bombers limping home. The bomber crews gave them a name: Red Tail Angels. The statistics validated their preference. Research conducted by Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman revealed that bombers flying under 332nd Fighter Group escort lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters, compared to an average of 46 losses for other P-51 groups in the 15th Air Force. That superior protection rate occurred despite the Red Tails flying some of the longest and most perilous missions of the entire war.
By war's end, the Tuskegee Airmen had compiled a combat record that obliterated every pre-war assumption about black military capability. Combat operations: 1,578 combat missions flown, 15,000-plus individual sorties completed, 179 bomber escort missions, 311 missions for the 15th Air Force, enemy aircraft destroyed, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground, 3 Me-262 jet fighters shot down on March 24, 1945. Ground targets destroyed: 950 rail cars, trucks, and motor vehicles, 254 locomotive engines. TA-22, former Italian destroyer Giuseppe Missori, damaged beyond repair on June 25, 1944. Protection record: 27 bombers lost to enemy fighters versus 46 average for other groups. Superior protection rate maintained across 179 escort missions. Individual achievements: Lee Archer, 4 confirmed victories. Joseph Ellsbury, 4 victories, including 3 FW-190s on July 12, 1944. Edward Toppins, 4 victories. Clarence Lester, 3 kills in 1 mission, July 18, 1944. Decorations earned: 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 332nd Fighter Group pilots, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, 8 Purple Hearts, 3 Distinguished Unit Citations for the 99th Fighter Squadron, 1 Distinguished Unit Citation for the 332nd Fighter Group. Human cost: 66 pilots killed in action, 32 pilots captured as prisoners of war, 84 killed in training and non-combat missions. The transformation from mockery to respect wasn't solely about courage. It reflected superior American training methodology and technological advantages that the Red Tails wielded with surgical precision. At Tuskegee, pilots accumulated more flight hours than their white counterparts, 300 hours compared to 200 for white pilots in standard programs. They practiced formation flying with obsessive repetition, knowing that in combat, discipline would be their decisive edge. The washout rate at Tuskegee was 60%, compared to 40% for white cadets elsewhere. Only the absolute best survived the program, creating what Colonel Noel Parrish, Tuskegee's commander, described as a super-selected group. The progression through aircraft types tells its own story. The 99th began with hand-me-down P-40 Warhawks that were already obsolete when they arrived in North Africa. These liquid-cooled Allison engine fighters were inferior to German Bf-19s and FW-19s in virtually every performance metric. Yet the Tuskegee pilots exploited the P-40's superior turning ability and rugged construction to hold their own. The arrival of P-51 Mustangs in July 1944 transformed the Red Tails into equals of any fighter unit in the war. The North American P-51D Mustang represented American industrial perfection. Its Packard-built Merlin engine delivered a top speed of 437 miles per hour. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns could shred any aircraft. Most critically, its range, over 1,600 miles with drop tanks, allowed it to escort bombers anywhere in the Reich. Behind every pilot who destroyed a German aircraft stood dozens of support personnel, mechanics, armorers, crew chiefs who kept the Red Tails flying. Of the approximately 16,000 Tuskegee Airmen who served, fewer than 1,000 were pilots. The rest were the unsung heroes who made victory possible. The ground crews performed miracles with limited resources. Ramatelli Airfield in Italy was primitive compared to other American bases. Spare parts were chronically scarce, with the 332nd often last in line for supplies. Yet their aircraft availability rate, the percentage of planes ready for combat, equaled or exceeded that of white units. These ground crews also faced combat. German raids on Ramatelli were infrequent but lethal. On March 24, 1944, a German bombing raid killed several support personnel. The men continued working through the attack, dragging aircraft away from burning fuel dumps. The strategic bombing campaign over Europe provided the ultimate proving ground for the Tuskegee Airmen. Each B-17 Flying Fortress cost $238,000 and carried 10 highly trained crew members. The loss of a single bomber represented a strategic setback that cascaded through the entire war effort. This is why bomber protection mattered infinitely more than individual aerial victories.
Colonel Davis understood this reality when he ordered his pilots to resist the temptation to chase German fighters. "Anyone can shoot down a fighter if they abandon their post," he told them. "It takes discipline to stay with the bombers when the enemy is running." The Red Tail's escort tactics evolved through hard experience. They developed a three-layer defense system: close escort weaving directly above the bombers, medium escort positioned to intercept incoming fighters, and high escort watching for diving attacks from above. This system demanded precise coordination and absolute discipline. The Tuskegee Airmen fought two wars simultaneously, against fascism in the skies over Europe and against racism in their own country. Their combat record challenged both Nazi racial ideology and American segregation, proving that excellence in aerial combat transcended racial categorization entirely. While the Tuskegee Airmen battled Germans abroad, they fought prejudice at home. Their victories over the Luftwaffe made front-page news in black newspapers, but were frequently minimized or completely ignored by the mainstream white press. The Pittsburgh Courier's Double V campaign, Victory Against Fascism Abroad and Racism at Home, held up the Tuskegee Airmen as living proof of what black Americans could achieve when given opportunity. The contrast with German awareness was striking. By 1945, the Luftwaffe allegedly knew exactly who flew the red-tailed Mustangs, calling them Schwarze Vogelmenschen. Meanwhile, vast numbers of white Americans had no idea black pilots even existed. This ignorance was deliberate policy. The War Department rarely publicized the Tuskegee Airmen's achievements. Victory in Europe brought not celebration, but uncertainty for the Tuskegee Airmen. While white units prepared for victory parades and homecoming celebrations, the 332nd faced questions about whether they'd even have a future. The Army Air Forces planned to maintain segregation despite overwhelming combat evidence of its absurdity. For decades after World War II, the achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen remained largely invisible to mainstream America. Individual pilots struggled with this historical erasure. Lee Archer, with his 4 confirmed victories, worked as a business executive but rarely discussed his war record. "Nobody believed me anyway," he said. "A black fighter pilot. Must be lying." In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, integrating the United States military, a decision directly influenced by the Tuskegee Airmen's combat performance. Benjamin Davis, who had led the Red Tails over Berlin, became the Air Force's first black general in 1954. Recognition came slowly, painfully slowly. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. Only 300 of the original pilots survived to attend the ceremony. Many had waited over 60 years for national recognition. The transformation from mockery to respect wasn't mythology, it was documented fact. The numbers remain irrefutable. 112 aerial victories against the Luftwaffe. 3 Me, 262 jet fighters destroyed in one mission. 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground. 27 bombers lost versus 46 average for other groups. 96 distinguished flying crosses earned by 332nd Fighter Group pilots. The men allegedly nicknamed Schwarze Vogelmenschen proved that prejudice crumbles when confronted with undeniable capability. Every German fighter destroyed, every bomber protected, every mission completed added evidence to an irrefutable case. The color of a pilot's skin had absolutely nothing to do with his ability to fly and fight. Roscoe Brown, who shot down a German jet over Berlin, summarized their achievement perfectly. "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all 3 battles. The Tuskegee Airmen hadn't just won battles, they had changed history. They fought 3 wars simultaneously and emerged victorious in all of them, defeating the Luftwaffe in combat, dismantling Nazi racial ideology through performance, and eventually helping demolish American segregation through undeniable excellence."
When finally given the opportunity, the Tuskegee Airmen soared, transforming mockery into respect, prejudice into acceptance, and enemies into witnesses of their extraordinary achievement.
If you found this story compelling,
please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more stories from the Second World War that deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to stay connected with history that matters. These stories shape the world we live in today, and we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Our community reaches across continents, connecting people who understand that history isn't just dates and names in textbooks. History is people making choices, taking risks, doing difficult things because they believed it mattered. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering.